Nancy ditches the Dems, the whipping hoax was just that, and Mayorkas knew about it. It's just another reason to impeach him. Nancy wants to punch Trump, and hey, let's go for it. BLM gets exposed as the frauds that they are. Parkland shooter gets life. Ukraine gets more money. AOC gets blasted. Kanye gets debanked. Alex Jones gets bankrupted. I guess free speech is dead. Rest in peace, Angela Lansbury and Hagrid. I'm Mimi. This is The Rundown. Get ready for a different kind of Politics Plus podcast with a very special guest. Here we go. Hey everybody, welcome to Politics Plus Podcast. I'm Mimi, and with me today is a special guest and friend, Pastor David Minor. He has written and published a book, In Spite of Me, and you can find it on Amazon. David, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's my honor and pleasure to be here.
So we're going to kind of do a book club, and we're just going to go through the book. I got a couple of chapters I want to go over. And we're going to start in chapter 3, Why Me? Pastor David grew up in a small town, very footloose style. So let's hear about your growing up.
Yeah. So I wrote the book, and when I did, I realized in order for anybody to understand it, they would have to know how I came to be, who I was, and why I wrote the book. So I have to go back long before I was ever born to my dear grandmother. She was from Tennessee, and they were born in the Deep South and raised kind of prejudice over the years. And after the war and all that business was over, her family had lost a lot of property. But when the Depression came and there was no jobs, my grandfather got a job in the Transit Authority as an undercover policeman. And he got that job because of the connection my grandmother's family had with the governor of Tennessee. Somehow made arrangements and got the job. So they moved to Brooklyn. And everything was kind of going along just kind of fine. And then the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And on that day that the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, my Uncle Jimmy told me every young man that was of age walked right out of school, just walked out of school, and either the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, or the Marine Corps. And my Uncle Jimmy, who was 17 years old at the time, walked out and went down and joined the Marine Corps and went off to Parris Island. Well, my grandmother was very upset about this, and she was not going to allow her son to die in any war. And a very red-haired, sweet, but stubborn woman from Tennessee. And she got a letter to the governor telling her of her situation with her son. And somehow the governor got the letter to the President of the United States. And then my uncle's in Parris Island, and they're going through the camp there. He gets called in by the drill sergeant one day, and he's there, but there's some high-ranking officials with him, corporals or whatever they were. And he walked in, he thought, what's this about? And he said, young man, he said, I've got a letter here that your mother wrote to the President of the United States. And he's read the letter. My uncle had no idea how, but he said, oh, okay. He said, if you answer yes, you're going home. He said, are you sickly? He said, no, I'm not sickly. There's nothing wrong with me. So he said, get back out there. So my grandmother said, no, wait a minute. I got to the president, and this kid's not going off to, die in this war. She was fit to be tied. So he was done with Parris Island. He came home, and the battleship Missouri was built in the Brooklyn Naval Yard. And it took a while to build it. And so while he was on Parris Island, they're building this great ship. And then they were going to send it up to Virginia, where the guns were to be put on, then to go out and fight the Japanese. And he was going to be on that ship. And my grandmother, very upset, didn't know what to do, fit to be tied, got to the president. He said no. Uncle Jim said, I'm fine. So she's walking down the street of Bedford-Stuyvesant in Brooklyn. And she walks by a little storefront church, didn't know what it was, but walked by it, and heard noise, a lot of noise coming from that church. Didn't know what it was, but she's nosy, and she always was, and she stuck her head in, and when she seen all those black faces in there, she backed up. She's from Tennessee, and they had that little prejudice, and started down the sidewalk, and one of them came out and said, "Can we help you, ma'am?" She said, "What are you all doing in there?" She said, "We're praying." She said, "Praying about what?" And she took out a list of names, and it was hundreds and hundreds of names of young men that were going off to war. And she said, "We pray until we hear from God. And then we check off the name." And she saw some checked off and said, "Then we move on and we know he's coming home." Now, my grandmother, I didn't know anything about anything but checking off names and boys coming home, signed me up. She walked in there, gave her heart to Jesus, whatever that meant to her, and started praying with those ladies and came home. And here comes my grandfather. He comes home, and he thinks he's a big, rough, tough undercover policeman, you know. He comes home, and she says, "I found these ladies, and we're praying, and God's going to answer. We're checking the names off." He said, "She's lost her mind." He put her in the car, took her to the doctor, and says, "She's lost her mind. She's hanging down there with blankety blanks we don't associate ever with. They're talking to God, checking names off lists." And he said, she's lost her mind. So the doctor, you know, he checked her over, and when he got done, he said to my grandfather, he said, "Look, it's religious hysteria." He diagnosed her. And he said, "She'll get over it. Just leave her alone." He said, "All these women, you know, their sons, they're just going." He said, "Just leave it alone." Well, my grandmother wasn't getting over it. Every day she'd get up and go down there and pray with them black ladies. And my grandfather, he would just mad and cussing and carrying on. And then my uncle got his orders. The battleship is leaving tomorrow. And he gets up in the morning and he has his duffel bag. He says, "Mama," she gave him breakfast. He said, "Kiss me goodbye." He said, "The battleship's leaving today." And she said, "Well, I'm not kissing you goodbye, because that boat's not leaving until we hear from God." Now, my grandfather said, "Have you lost your mind? Your son is going on the ship. He may never come back." She said, "I'm not kissing her goodbye." 3 days in a row, my Aunt Dorothy was telling me about it. They could not get the battleship out of the harbor. And every night, dinner's on the table. Dinner's on the table. And that third night, and I've heard it 1,000 times, and this is why I am who I am today. My grandmother said the living God stood at the foot of my bed, not religion, the living God, and said, "Sophie, I'm bringing your boy home alive. And every young man that leaves on the boat, I'm making a covenant with you. I'm bringing everyone back alive."
Everyone on the Missouri.
Every boy that goes out is coming home alive. She said, "I released the boat." My grandfather said, "Oh, you're crazy woman. I released the boat." The boat gets down to Virginia. They get the guns out. It's out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And the Japanese had stated, "Send it out here. It was our greatest boat. We're going to sink it." And there were 3 or 4 times when the Japanese made an all-out attack with their kamikaze pilots. These young men doped up with airplanes full of all kinds of bombs that would explode on impact. And God protected that ship. But let me tell you something. There's a term called fake news. Have you ever heard of it?
I've heard fake news. We think we've heard of fake news, you guys.
Anybody ever heard of fake news? And my grandmother's laying on her bed. She's believing God. "I know I met with God. He's coming home alive." And the New York Times, not once, my Aunt Dorothy told me twice, printed and reported that the Japanese had sunk the Missouri.
Fake news.
Can you imagine? My grandmother's on her bed. My grandfather comes in. He's got this thing. He throws it on her bed. He said, "There's your God. There's the wasted time with them blanketies down there." He said, "Your boy's dead." He said, "Now you get your black dress on. We're going to grieve around here." Now, my grandmother loved Jesus, but she wasn't taking no nonsense. And I'm going to tell you what she said. She said, "You get that piece of blankety blank blank off my bed, because it is a lie from the pit of hell. God said my boy's coming home, and it's a lie." Twice. And guess what? The Missouri came home. The only death, there was one death. One death on the Missouri. It was the kamikaze pilot that slammed into that boat with such power that he exploded through the windshield and was splattered on the side of that boat. But other than that, every young man came home alive.
Was her husband a believer after that?
Oh, Grandpa got saved. Grandpa was a believer. And so how I came to be who I am years later, my grandma moves to Pennsylvania and she starts a church because that's who she is. She didn't like the Lutheran, the Baptist, the Pentecostal. No, it's not. It's got to be about Jesus. She starts a church with a town drunk. And he'd go every night and get drunk with him, and go home, and every night. And Grandma had seen him going back and forth.
I believe Noah was drunk too.
Oh yeah, I don't want to say his name, but he had a little problem. He didn't just go and have a few drinks and go home. He stayed there till they threw him out. And one night he landed in her garbage cans at 3 a.m. And she went out and she brought him in the house and prayed with him. And God, I wasn't there. I don't know what happened. The audience can be the judge. He had a miraculous conversion. And the next Sunday, Grandma started a church with him and my grandpa. And over the years, it grew into the largest church in 2 counties. Yep. And it was all, and it was not because of anybody. It was mostly in spite of everybody. But my grandma pastored and my daddy pastored, and I grew up in that. But my dad was very strict, and everything was a sin. Coca-Cola was a sin. Going to the movies was a sin. Smoking a cigarette, my God. Had a drink, you're going straight to hell. I don't care what. Everything was a sin. Going to the movies, going on a date, going to the prom. So, that was his thoughts. I'm not my grandmother's. He got his own little thing. But my grandmother, when I was 16 years old and my cousin Jim was 17, his dad was the chief of police. My dad's the pastor. And we were the 2 little brattiest kids you could find. And my grandmother brought us in one day and said, now, you boys, I want to tell you something. Both of you boys are called to love people and pastor. And I said, Grandma, I'm not going to do it. I said, I'm not even sure I want to be a Christian. And she said, boy, she said, did I ask you what you wanted to do? She said, I said, no, I'm telling you what you're going to do. She said, now you don't have to. I'll never forget it. My cousin Jimmy, we were talking about it today. She said, if you don't, she said, God will take you both home early. And I saw 2 young men in caskets, and he'll take you home early. And I said, well, I guess I'd rather be a live preacher than a dead anything else. And so people say, well, how did you get saved? I said, well, God threatened to kill me.
Well, there was a moment where you and, I believe, Jim, and an almost head-on collision with nobody else but his own grandparents.
Yeah, it was crazy. So after Grandma had told us about that, we kind of said, okay, we're going to be really good, and we're going to stop rearing and tearing and acting stupid. And we were downtown, and a friend of mine who's passed away now, sad to say, Mickey Lambert, and my cousin Ronnie, they stopped and picked us up in this kid's car. And his parents had a carpet store, and whatever he wanted, they bought him. And this kid wanted a Super Sport. He had a 396 Super Sport with 2 4-barrels, whatever that meant, but it would fly. And we were racing that car all over the area. And there was one car that he had never raced that he always said he wanted to race. But we weren't. We said we don't want to race. We even said we got in the car. We don't want to race because Grandma's saying, 2 boys are going to die. So I said we don't want to race. Jimmy and I, we don't want to race. We're downtown, Route 6, which runs all the way from the West Coast to the East Coast, runs right through Callisport, Pennsylvania. We're sitting down there, and we come up behind this car that he's been looking to race for a year, Denny Glassmeyer, and Ronnie Lynn and my cousin said, "There's the car." And they start zoom the motors, and I'm going, we don't want to race. We don't want to race. They started down Route 6. This is right downtown where it's a Saturday about 11 o'clock. Trucks, cars, farmers, people going to market. This road is full of people. And he gets on the wrong side of the road, and they start racing right down Main Street. 60, 70, 80. At 100 mile an hour, he wasn't funny anymore. And I looked at Jimmy, and it was like we looked at each other, and we both said, oh, my God, we're going to die. And I said, stop, guys, because we're coming upon hairpins curves. I mean, and when we both hit the floor, the last time I looked at the speedometer, it was 135 miles an hour. And Jimmy and I, we looked and we were both crying. And I said, God, if you get me out of this alive, I'll do anything. I'll do anything. I'll go anywhere. Him blubbering the same thing. And I put my head up to look, and I'm looking right straight at my grandma and grandpa's car. We're like that. And I don't know how it happened. Inches, we moved like that, and we flew by them. They didn't even know who we were. They didn't even know who we were. We flew by them so fast, and we were seconds away from all of us going into eternity. And I'm going to tell you what, I haven't always done it right, but I've always said from that day forward, my life is yours. It don't belong to me anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, one of the ongoing themes of the book, you repeat it constantly, when he gave to those who could do no good in return, God did for him what he could not do for himself.
Yeah.
Wow. It's repeated constantly in the book. It's a beautiful, beautiful reminder. So we are in Faces You Can't Forget. And Pastor David has got an invite to visit Romania during a communist regime. Talk to us a little bit about that, what you saw.
Yeah.
And there are things you just can't forget.
Yeah. So I'm happy now. Years later, I'm fulfilling myself as a pastor. Pastor with my dad, and our church grew and grew. We built beautiful auditorium, and then we built housing for our elderly, and then we built a great gymnasium for our kids, and then a prayer room, and we had a TV program for 10 years called Good News all over that area in Pennsylvania. Very successful. I was very happy ministry-wise, and a friend of mine, his name is Jim Finn, and he was like the James Dean or the James Bond of preachers. He was always smuggling Bible. I just smuggled 40 Bibles to China. And I was like, he said, you need to come with me sometime. I said, Brother Jim, I'm very happy here in Couchport, Pennsylvania. God's given us 400 or 500 people. Everything's fine. Everything's paid for. I'm really happy here. Well, sometime, I said, but I want to come home. You've been risking your life over there. I like coming home to my family. But he calls me up and he said, listen, communism is finished in Romania. He'd been going there. And he said, come with me. It's free now. Well, I didn't know. It'd only been free like a week. The revolution happened on our Thanksgiving Day of 1989. And it ended on Christmas Day when they shot the dictator in the street. And that's the secret police turned against the army. And that's a story, I think it's in the book, was such an amazing story. And so it was only like 2 weeks later, he says, come with me. And I'm in Couchport. The news is who won the football game this week, so I don't know what's going on. So I said, okay, well, it's free. I'll go with you. When we crossed from Hungary into Romania, it was like stepping back to 1940.
Wow.
But everything was broke.
Right.
Phones weren't working. There wasn't a street light that worked. There wasn't a red light that worked. And people went blocks and blocks just to get bread. And I'm thinking to myself, this is insane. And we're sneaking around the middle of the night to get gas because you got these fighting with these people. And I'm thinking to myself, this isn't a missionary trip. I was thinking about, we come, we preach, we have a couple of things to eat, we go home and say thank you. And I had never seen such depression and this darkness in my life. And I said to myself on the third night, I remember saying something, I will never come back to this place. I can't wait to get home. But we were taken outside of town, and there was a huge garbage dump. 2 things hit me, that was one of them. And I saw children fighting with the rats for food. I mean, you can see them. And I'm like, what am I seeing here? And then they began to explain to me.
It's a horror movie.
Horror movie. No birth control of any type. You had to have at least 5 children. If you do, you're going to go to jail. Under Ceausescu, he wanted to have these men. And the horrors he did to those children, if they were born with a birth defect, they were taken away and put in some encampment somewhere. And it was so horrible for the families. after they had the fifth or sixth one, they would just leave them. And they just stayed off and just were full of children. They were living under the street. And you know what I said? I said, you know what? I can't save them all. Maybe I can save one or two. And and then one other thing that happened to me, we visited this. They said it was a mass grave where folks that were killed that were Christians, and a building was there, and there was a table with tie downs, and there was still blood on the table where they'd been beaten. And I remember getting up and saying, "My God, this is the most God-forsaken thing I ever saw in my life." And as I was just brushing the dirt there, I literally, the sun had come out, the snow melted. I literally uncovered a human bone with my foot.
Oh.
And it came to me, I said the same thing that the man of God said. He said, "Can these bones ever live again?" And I said that. Can these bones live again? And I felt like God really said something to me. And he really said it depends on who's interested in the bones living. I felt he just spoke that to me. And I remember I went home and I couldn't stop thinking about those people. And I said I'd never go back, but I went back at least 100 times. And
Inspired Haven of Hope?
at orphanage that we did, we were able to. You want to hear a real miracle? Let me tell you how God works. I always tell people, if you can get involved in something God's doing, watch the miraculous happen.
And do it afraid.
Yeah, you go. There you go. That's right. Do it because you have that word. And it's all through the book Miracles. But one of the things that really touched me, I was flying home on one of the trips, and there was a lady bringing home a little child. And I said, it's so sweet. I said, if you don't mind me asking, what did it cost you to adopt that baby? $24,000 or $22,000, whatever it was. I'm like, what? Does it really cost that much to do it? So in my heart, I wanted to do that. And I remember getting home. I don't know if I shared it even with you, honey, but a little girl in my church came up to me. She said, "Pastor Minor, I had a dream." I said, "What did you dream?" She said, "I dreamed you were passing out certificates. And on the certificate, everybody got a child." I said, "Really?" She said, "You're in the church." So I said, "You know what? Then I'm going to do it." I hired you have to hire a social worker. I hired that. I hired a director, Mr. Andy Lehman. I got all my licensing done for the state of Pennsylvania. And then I tried to get my adoptions license approved there. And it came down to one thing: you have to pay a bribe. Mm-hmm. If you don't pay this ridiculous bribe, and they loved me because I was doing good things. I was sending containers of medicines, but they said you have to pay a bribe. I said, I'm not going to pay a bribe. And I said, Lord, how's this going to happen that I'm going to get this license? How's it going to happen? I'm not going to pay this bribe. And here's how God works. When you do good for those that do you the good in return, he'll do for you what you can't do for yourself. I couldn't get that license. Even if I had $100,000, I'm not going to pay that. I'd rather put it to an orphanage. And so here I am, and I get a phone call, and I don't even remember who it was. I wish I could. And it said, Pastor Minor says, we have a container of Osh Gosh by Gosh children's pajamas worth thousands of dollars. We'd like to donate it to your ministry in Romania. I said, really? Would you pay the freight to get it there? I said, absolutely. That container, when they arrived there, and they couldn't, it was pajamas for the children, it was worth so much money. We went to the very top of the list, and I don't remember the count. I think it's in the book, but we got 16 or 17 children. The first one cost $350 or $360.
Wow. Wow.
Yep. And my first little one, I tell about her in the book, little sweetest little thing ever. And I went to the state orphanage. We didn't have our orphanage at that time, and they brought her out, and we were just beginning. And the poor little thing, her head was shaved bald because of the lice problem. They were all shaved bald. She had a little twisted eye and a little club foot, and she sang a beautiful little song. And
And her vision was repaired in her club foot?
Let me tell you what happened. So I can't remember how it happened because it just hits me and I can't even hardly talk.
I remember reading.
I remember she was like 7 or 8 years old, and I said, oh, Bob and Joni are fine. Sweet little people. They're both nurses. They got married late in life.
And I went home and I said, I found your baby. Mm-hmm. And she's the sweetest, loving thing. I think they fixed her eye, but her foot, if I remember correctly, was it turned as she was coming over. Yeah. But what a sweetheart. That was the second one I did. The first one was my paisano. And he was so sweet. And I brought him over first. And all he wanted to do is see a McDonald's. More than a mom or a dad. McDonald's. Andy Lehman went to get him. The whole time he's coming home, he's going, America, McDonald's, America, McDonald's. But yeah, God, we were able to do that, but it would never have happened if I had had that container of these beautiful pajamas given.
Wow.
So they could give to the children.
And America and McDonald's.
Yep.
Forever married.
Forever.
We're going to take a little bit of a left turn now and go into something a little bit more fun and lighthearted. Rod Stewart.
Oh, you bet.
Oh, you bet.
Yeah. So that was pretty cool, right?
Rod Stewart.
I get on an airplane. I can't remember. We flew from New York to Rome or somewhere, and then you go into Bucharest. And as we made that second plane change, of course, I'm walking by the very good first class and then kind of lousy first to the very back to the real cheap seat is. And he looked familiar, and I didn't know who it was. And then Rod Stewart's on this plane. Rod Stewart's on this plane. Rod Stewart's on this plane. I said, really? He's doing some big concert in Romania. I said, wow, that's pretty cool. So, you know, as I'd been going there, God had been giving me favor. I had been given, after the pajamas, and they knew my heart, the government there had given me an award, and the same award that was given to those that died in the revolution. I was very honored, and so people were getting to know me. And but you know, I wasn't thinking much about it. So here we land, and I look out the window. There's people holding flowers, and there's a limousine, and then more people holding flowers. I'm thinking, man, look at Rod's doing. Look at how they're going to welcome them. And I'm watching, and he gets off the plane, and he's looking at the people, and they're looking at him, and then he looks at them, and they look past them. And I'm thinking, how come they're not giving him the flowers? I get off the plane. It took an hour because I was way in the back. And they come running past their name, and they come running to me with the flowers. Rod Stewart's like, well, who's this guy? So it's in the book. It was just a cute little thing that happened. I felt like the Lord saying, yeah, good job.
So from a plane with Rod Stewart to Flight 800.
Yeah. Remind me, Flight 800. This is what happens when you get older.
Flight 800, Boeing 747-100. Yes.
One that crashed. Yeah. Oh, Jesus. I'll never forget that. I flew home in that airplane that turned around and went down in the water. And it was on that plane where, and I don't understand how it happened, but I'm sitting inside in the window. And I was coming back from Romania, so I caught that plane. I think it was in Rome, maybe, where it flew out of. I don't remember. But I'm on the inside, sitting there, and they serve dinner, and everything is okay. And suddenly, I have a panic attack that I've never had in my life. And I was like shaking, and I'm like, I gotta get up. And the poor two old folks. And everybody gets up. You know how hard that is. Everybody gets up. I go in there, and I look in the mirror in the bathroom, and I did not recognize the face I was looking at. It was like, weird. Is that me? Is that really me? And I was in there for like 20 minutes. Are you okay in there? So I come out. I didn't eat anything. I got home. I lost my appetite. And I wasn't like not caring, but I had totally empathy. I had no empathy. I was just living. And I started losing weight, which was all right because I probably needed to do that. And then my hair was falling out, which was not good because I said, you know, I can be bald and skinny, but not the same at the same time. And I mean, my hair is falling out like gobs, right? So I go to the doctor. I said, what's wrong with me? They check all kinds of things. And then they sent me to a specialist up in Elmira, New York. And he gets done. He says, Reverend, he said, you have clinical depression. I said, I do. I said, well, what? He said, no, it's not about something. It's just you have this. He said, no, here's what you got to take. I remember it was Zoloft, Ambien, and what was the other one he gave me? He gave me 3 things.
Sounds like a suicidal cocktail.
It was Zoloft, Ambien, and I can't remember, 3 really heavy drugs. And I couldn't go to sleep. So I was taking like 3 Ambien or 4 Ambien, or 5, and I would literally, on my couch, take the medicine, and I could feel myself falling over. And then I'd have these horrible nightmares.
I've heard of that. People take Ambien.
And you can't wake up.
Right.
When you have a nightmare and you're knocked yourself out so much, this man would come out of my fireplace and be and I'd be fighting with him. I said, it's only a dream, it's only a dream. And
it's a night terror.
It was horrible. The worst time in my life. And I went down to like 145 pounds. My hair was falling out. And I was like, and I'm a vain person. I'm going to admit it up front. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to be bald. So I drive to Buffalo. And I tell them, do something. So they sell me this thing you put on your head. Instantly, you have hair back. Instantly. So they give me this thing and they tie it on, whatever. And I was like, I come back and, everybody was kind of behind me. I'm sure they were talking about it. I was happy. I got hair back. I was invited to go preach down in Washington, Pennsylvania, I think it was. I'm down near Pittsburgh. And I'm driving down this good friend of mine's church. And I'm literally driving on this 4-lane highway coming to a red light. And I'm having this conversation. Is that red, yellow, or green? In my head. I'll never forget it. And as I'm having this conversation, I slam right into the back of a car at 55 miles an hour. Bang! Let me tell you what happens. This thing flies off my head. And the airbag goes off. And it takes it and pins it to my face.
Well, if God doesn't have a sense of humor.
Pins it to my face. But the car is full of smoke. I think I've died, gone to hell. I can smell the smoke. Honest to God. Then I realized it's that thing, they call it a unit, that was on my head. I got it off. I had it sideways where the cop comes up. He put the window down, the car's in smash. He says, sir, have you been drinking? I said, no, but I'm in severe depression. So the cop says, okay. He said, relax. He said, well, he got me through it, and I ended up having to rent a car, and I got there. But, I got home, and I had gone through that for about 3 or 4 months. I'm a mess. And I said, God, I can't do this anymore. These pills, either you're God, and you heal or you don't. And I had these little sweet ladies. Aunt Sue was one of them, and I remember Mary Robadale. I remember seeing their faces, and my Aunt Dorothy. And they always would get down there on Wednesday morning and pray in the church. They just would go pray. And I walked in there on a Wednesday morning, and I said, ladies, I don't plan to leave here until I'm healed. I don't care if I'm here starving. I'm not leaving. And they were the sweetest things. They were kind of Pentecostal a little bit and shouting, screaming. It was the funniest thing. And one got a hold of me and said, hold on. The other one said, let go. They were shaking and pushing. One was speaking in tongues. The other one, I think, was cussing the devil out in the background. Patty Bowman. But I'm going to tell you what happened, honey. I got up from there about an hour later, and I went and I threw every pill away. And that night, I slept.
Wonderful.
My hair grew back, and God delivered me from that. But he came to that place. He delivered.
All right, so I want to know about your friend Bill, who collected his own life insurance, started a ranch in Montana, and retired in Fort Myers, Florida. And I want to make sure he's okay and safe from the hurricane that just hit Fort Myers, Florida.
Yeah, he's more than okay. Because
wonderful.
Guess what? Bill said, I don't like fishing anymore. I'm going back to Montana.
He did.
He's back in Montana. I talked to him 2 weeks ago.
On his ranch.
On his ranch, he's doing the same blooming thing again.
One of my favorite stories in the whole book.
He's like 81 or something. It's crazy.
He collected his own life insurance.
Yep.
And he beat the odds.
Yeah, let me give you that. You ready?
Yeah.
So, a lot of times you have folks that aren't in your church that just come and just say, can you help me? And then my church was a chiropractor, Dr. Fink, and he was treating this fella. He was a fly fisherman, and I think I got it straight. He was either the number 5 or 6 rated fly fisherman in the nation. And he had developed this system of fly fishing. This fly at a certain time would always work. And people came from all over the place to fly fish at his lodge, in a beautiful lodge, restaurant, lakes there. And I believe once he fished with Ronald Reagan.
Wow.
He was on the Wild World of Sports, and so everybody knew Bill Halderman. I had never met him.
Imagine fishing with the Gipper.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So he is being treated by Dr. Fink, and he confides that my marriage is kind of falling apart. And he said, look, my pastor, you don't have to be a member of our church. He'll talk to you. You could get some counsel. So he calls me up. I said, well, come on in. So he comes in and he tells me, I've done this and that. We got problems and we're falling apart. I said, look, what would it look like? This is all I said. Bill, what would it look like to your wife if you went home and said, honey, I can probably be a better man. So what I'd like to do is go to church. You don't have to come. I want to be a better man for you. I know I haven't been the best man. And maybe she'll come with you, but what would it look like? He said, I don't know. I'll give it a try. So Sunday morning, guess who's in church? Bill and Barb. So I go down and hug him, and he said, oh, I loved it. And then we prayed together, and he said, this is my church. And they came for about 11, 12 months. They were there, maybe a year, half a year and a half. I'm not sure. My memory's not as good as it used to be. And I went to dinner with him. I went to his house, and then he calls me, and I go up to the hospital, the local hospital. I said, what's going on? He said, they're seeing some masses or something here. He said, I got a little pain, but, he said, I'm going down. He was a veteran from Vietnam War, so I'm going down to the hospital, the Veterans Hospital, and they're going to find out. So they opened him up, and they told him from the Agent Orange, this cancer was all throughout him here. And I believe they said every organ's affected. And they closed him up. And they said, listen, we'll give you the radiation, chemotherapy, and the stem cell something they were going to do. And they said, but you only have a 2% chance you'll live. So it's a 98% chance you'll not make it. But he said, well, 2% is better than no percent. So he said, do it. So I went to see him, and he'd been down there a little bit. And when I say this ex-Marine, I think about that ex-Marine, tough. Not a big guy, but he was tough. He's there, and he's skin and bones. He looks like he'd been in a concentration camp. And not a hair on his head. Throat so burnt from the radiation. He said he could hardly talk. He just would go. And I walked in there, and I said, how you doing, Bill? And we talked for a minute, and then he said, Pastor, I have a dream. I said, it sounds like Martin Luther King. What was your dream?
It's a good dream.
He said, I want to go back to Montana, where I was as a little boy, and I want to raise ponies again. And I was like, how?
Me too.
I said, like, how are you going to do that? Literally just how? Because he'd been told he had less than 2 weeks to live. And not only by one doctor review, but 2 doctor boards had told him that. And a third one that I'm going to tell you about in a minute. So I said, well, how are you going to do that? Because the prognosis was nothing worked and it was over. I said, how are you going to do that, Bill? His pastors want to know how he's going to do that. He said, well, he tells me, logistically, he started telling me how he's going to do it. He said, well, we're selling the lodge, and I have this over here. He said, oh, and I sold my life insurance policy. I'm like, how'd you do that? You're not even gone yet. He said, well, there's people that buy these. And they'll give you, like, I'm getting $80,000. Mine's worth $100. I'm getting $80,000. I said, well, how's that work? He said, well, first you have to prove you're going to die. He said, so they sent their own doctors here. Their own doctors came and said, yeah, he's a goner. It's over. He said, and I got the money. He said, so I'm putting that all together, and we're going to Montana, and we're going to buy the ranch. And his wife's over there like going, yeah, right, we're going to Montana to buy a ranch. She's like shaking her head behind him. And I'm like, okay. I said, and how? He said, well, you're going to pray for me, Pastor. God's going to heal me. I'm going to Montana. I'm like, well, I'm thinking to myself, don't put that on me, brother. I ain't going to heal nobody. I pray for a lot of people. Now, I'm telling this to myself and you, right? I'm saying to myself, everybody I prayed for died. Everyone in this situation that I prayed for, they're all gone. So I knew he'd be gone in just a few days. I even made a phone call and said, tell Fickinger that get ready to come get Bill. But I prayed with him. I said, as his pastor, I'm not going to walk out of here and not pray for this man. So I said, Lord, honor Bill's faith. You're God that can heal. And I prayed just like I prayed in Jesus' name, but I knew he'd be dead soon. Well, it's been, I don't know how many years, 30 years?
30 years?
He walked out of that place, my brother, and went to Montana and did exactly what he said he was going to do. The insurance company guy called him 3 or 4 times. Finally, they quit. They said, when you dying, I'm not dying. God healed me. Don't bother me anymore. Came back a couple years ago, right to Fort Myers. Signed in the book because it was too late. Came back to Fort Myers. You ready for this? Fishing. Then he said, I don't like it anymore. But his wife got sick and had a heart attack and died. Now, let me tell you the truth. Died. He said, you keep her alive until my pastor comes. 5 times she coded. He said, you keep her alive until my pastor comes. When I got there, she was hooked up to everything, and I knew she would die that night. God didn't heal her. Am I right, honey? God healed that woman, and she said to her husband, I died 5 times, you're nothing.
You only died once.
So, it's their faith. And you think about that. Jesus would walk through a crowd, and some woman touched him. And he said, hey, what happened? It wasn't his faith, it was her faith. So when Bill said, Pastor, I'm shocked, I said, brother, I thought for sure I was burying you. And we laughed together. It was his faith, not mine. And God honors, without faith, it's impossible to please God. He doesn't care where it comes from. If you give me a little bit of faith, He's going to work with you.
Yeah. And helping people who can't always help themselves. And we tend, as you say in the book, to always donate to celebrities and donate to famous people. But we pass the homeless man that's sitting on the side of the street. So I really liked that you made that comment. Like, who would you give to? Someone who has it all or somebody who has nothing?
Right.
I just wanted to make a quick comment about that.
Right.
I really liked that. I think we already spoke about Paisano and the McDonald's in America, and all he was used to was salami and bread. America, America. And we have when we give. Let's talk about giving. Like I just said, we give to those who are less fortunate to ourselves. Give a tenth and then give more. I really like that. I really like that. God's challenge. Again, he repeats himself. When we did for those who could not do for us in any good in return, God did for us what we could not do for ourselves.
Yeah.
It's a constant message throughout the book, you guys. And then there's failure in chapter 29. Gideon, a mighty man. When we take responsibility for our failures, God takes responsibility for our success.
Hey, come on. That'll preach. That'll preach.
Why me? Why not you? I love that. When people always like, well, why? Well, I don't know. Why not? Why not? God is with us. If God is with us and it's this bad, can you imagine how bad it would be if God wasn't with us? It would be much worse.
Yep, that's what Gideon said.
God doesn't use perfect people. What that really means is that there are not any.
Period.
Period.
End of that conversation.
All right. As you see, there are 3 of us now, and we are welcoming David's wife and a good girlfriend of mine. And in chapter 33 is their number. What I learned from a little Jewish girl. What did you learn from a little Jewish girl?
So many things, but let me just tell you this.
And they met on Plenty of Fish, you guys. Can I just say that?
I'll plead the 5th on that. No comment. It was a free site, so I'm like, okay, it's free. So, I went through a divorce situation, and I literally stood in front of my church, and I don't know how many people do that, but said, I apologize, and I wish I'd have done better in that behalf, and my people loved me and accepted me. And I said, so I'm done with marriage. And, never again. But I was going to move here, so I would like to meet somebody. And a friend of mine who was a college professor had met a really wonderful person online. I'm like, you met her online? Really? And she said, yes. He said, you try it. So he helped me do it, and I was talking to Michelle. And we literally talked for hours and hours on the phone. And I was so illiterate computer-wise, I literally had to send a picture in the mail. And I don't know, I'll upload where to who and when.
Old-fashioned love letters.
Yeah, and I was also, I went on a couple of those dates, and those folks sometimes didn't tell the truth with those pictures. So I wasn't sure who looked like what. And I literally we just talked and talked and talked for hours, just hours, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And so I was like, I don't really like her a lot, but I don't know what she's going to look like, and I don't know anything. And so we met, and it was really incredible. It was really wonderful. But I said, 5 or 6 months, everything's, it's going to be what happens. And I just was too dumb to know when God was trying to bless me. So, and
we were both waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yeah, at any moment it's going to drop. So we were going to dinner, and we're walking by a casino to a restaurant. And I prayed the stupidest, craziest prayer that you could ever pray. And I said, God, look, there's no prophets to talk to me. There's nobody calling me on the phone. Everybody thinks I'm a failure now because I went through the divorce. What am I going to do? And I got this beautiful woman. But is this the woman for me? And at that very moment, my brother, somebody wins the slot machine, and it's dinging so loud you have to look at it. So I look, and there's my name, Minor. I'm thinking, I've never seen that ever at a slot machine before. And then the number 33 appeared, and I guess it was minor, major numbers or something, but it would not stop. Minor 33, minor 33. And I said, you know what? Maybe God's speaking to me. And I grabbed her by the hand, and I said to myself,
Minor was his name. That was a pretty good sign. I was convinced.
Maybe.
He needed more.
Maybe. So I grab her by the hand, and I go in there, and I said, if that lady will let me play that machine that just won, one pull, and I win the jackpot again, like she did, then this is the woman for me. And the woman said, get out of here. You're not playing my machine. With crazy. So I'm like, what does that mean? And it keeps ringing in my head. And so I'm like, I know what we're going to do. We go in there, and there's that thing that spins around.
Roulette.
The roulette wheel?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a gambler. You can see now. I thought it was a slot wheel. So the roulette wheel, and you have to sit down or you can't put a chip down.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody got up, and Michelle sat down, and I bought one chip, and I put it on 33. I said, all right, if it lands on 33, this is the one. And that's exactly what happened. I had my eye closed, and I even accused her of moving the marble. And the man said, nobody touches the marble. It's on 33.
Her number is 33.
Yep.
His name is Minor. What? Yes.
And you ready for this? When I moved here and they gave me my cell phone, I added it up. It equaled 33.
Come on.
Yeah.
33 is everywhere. Every account that we have.
Everything.
She saw it twice today. Once when she was having her hair done with me, she saw 33 seconds that she was on the phone with David. And then when she got in her car, it said 33.
That's how much
was
left I
twice
had for
today.
my gas in my gas tank.
Yeah.
But it's just a funny story. It's in the book because it was how I knew
Super
that.
cute.
Yeah.
And
Just my
I
story.
want you to briefly talk about what you do to give back for
Okay.
the homeless.
Well, I found on Facebook years ago, I guess it was in 2017, I was looking for something that I wanted to do, to give back. So I just sort of left it up to God and said, look, this is what I'm looking for. Put something in front of me. I look on Facebook and I see that in Ohio, these elderly women are making mats, sleeping mats for the homeless. and they're making them out of shopping bags, like Publix, Walmart, Walgreens.
Plastic bags.
Plastic bags. And they were cutting them, and then they were crocheting them, and then they showed handing it to a homeless person. And he was crying, and he was so grateful, thought this was the most incredible thing. I thought, that's it. That's what I want to do. Sarasota's filled with homeless people sleeping on the street. They need some cushion under them if they're going to be on the street. I mean, we'd love to get them off the street.
Yeah.
But if we can, at least we could try to make them more comfortable. So I went onto YouTube. I looked up how to crochet, because I didn't know how. They teach you anything. And I looked up these mats, and it showed different steps and how to do it. And I made my first mat. And same thing. This homeless person cried and said, "You're not charging me? You did this with your own hands?" And I was just so inspired. I kept making more, and then I found out at Goodwill you could teach a class, so I started teaching there. And then I started teaching at retirement homes and the elderly. They've started to do it. So, I keep passing it on. How many mats have I made now? Just
I was going to ask you how many mats.
225, I think, myself. Thank you.
But the cool thing is she has so many other people doing this. And what's amazing, she only did it to get one person off the ground. I don't think she'd been on TV 2 or 3 times and in 2 or 3 newspaper articles. And then you go again. She did good for people who could do no good in return, and in return, God lifts her up. And I'm so proud of her, too.
Exactly.
She does it until her hands are messed up, and I have to get on.
Aww. Well, I
Thank
think
you.
that is a beautiful note to end on. I want to thank you, David, for taking the time. And you, Michelle, for joining us.
Thank you, Michelle.
Just remember, through God, all things are possible. Do things unafraid and in spite of me. Thank you, guys. I'm Mimi. This is Politics Podcast, Politics Plus Podcast. I'm so excited. I want to thank my producer, Danny, for allowing me to bring on my friends and help promote their book. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Politics Plus Podcast. And thank you to Michelle and David Minor.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.